The mug shattered before I even realized my hand had let go of it. "Ronan," Kian whispered, standing so close I could feel the warmth of his breath. "Why are you looking at me like that?" I didn't answer. Couldn't. Because if I opened my mouth in that moment, 3 years of silence would have poured out of me like a flood I no longer had the strength to hold back. That was the night everything changed. But to understand how we got there, you have to go back to the beginning. To a rooftop, a guitar, and two boys who didn't yet know that friendship could break your heart just as easily as love. My name is Ronan Blake, and I was 22 years old the summer I met Kian Ferreira. We were both renting rooms in the same crumbling 3-story house near the university, the kind of place with creaky stairs and a landlord who never fixed anything. I just moved in with 2 suitcases and a box of books. Kian was the first person I met. He was sitting on the front steps, barefoot, strumming a guitar that was clearly missing a string. "You're going to want earplugs," he said without looking up. "I practice at weird hours." "Noted," I said, setting my box down. "I'm Ronan." He looked up then, and I remember thinking his eyes were an unfair shade of brown, warm, like coffee with too much cream, the kind of eyes that made you forget what you were about to say. "Kian," he said, and smiled like we were already friends. "Welcome to the worst-kept house in the city." I laughed. I didn't know yet that I would spend the next 3 years falling in love with that laugh of his. Slowly, quietly, the way frost creeps across a window overnight. You don't see it happening until the whole glass is covered. We became inseparable within weeks. He worked at a small bookstore downtown. I was finishing my degree in architecture. We had nothing and everything in common. He dragged me to open mic nights where he'd sing off-key on purpose just to make me laugh. I'd drag him to museum exhibits he pretended to hate but always asked to go back to. We cooked terrible pasta together on Sunday nights. We fell asleep on the couch during bad horror movies, his head eventually finding my shoulder without either of us mentioning it. It was easy. It was safe. And if I'm honest, it was the first time in my life I felt like I didn't have to perform being okay. I just was around him. I didn't let myself think about what the flutter in my chest meant. Not at first. There was a rooftop above our building that the landlord didn't know we'd found a way onto. A loose panel behind the laundry room led to a narrow ladder, and from there, a flat stretch of tar and gravel with a view of the whole skyline. Kian found it during our second month living there, and it became our place. We'd bring blankets, cheap beer, sometimes just tea in mismatched mugs, and talk until 2 in the morning about nothing and everything. It was on that rooftop in October that I first noticed the shift. We were lying side by side, shoulders touching, watching a plane blink its way across the sky. Kian had gone quiet, unusual for him, and when I turned to check on him, I found he was already looking at me. "What?" I asked, my voice catching somewhere it shouldn't have. "Nothing," he said, but he didn't look away. I like this. Whatever this is." "Friendship," I said, too quickly, like I was reminding myself. Something flickered across his face. So fast I almost missed it, before he smiled and looked back at the sky. "Yeah. Friendship." Neither of us moved. My hand was inches from his on the blanket, and I swear every nerve in my body was aware of that exact distance, counting it, aching to close it. I didn't. Not that night. But I started noticing things after that. The way his hand lingered on my shoulder a beat too long after a hug. The way he'd glance at my mouth sometimes when I was talking, then catch himself and look away. The way my own heartbeat had started doing something strange and unwelcome whenever he sat too close. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself a lot of things that year that weren't true. Winter came, and with it, a bitter cold that made the rooftop unusable. So our late nights moved to Kian's room instead. Smaller, warmer, cluttered with books and vinyl records he collected but rarely played. We'd sit on his bed with our backs against the wall, knees touching, sharing one set of headphones because his speaker was broken and neither of us wanted to admit we didn't want to sit apart. One night in December, we were listening to something slow and melancholic, some indie song about lost time, and Kian turned his head to say something. I turned mine at the exact same moment. Our faces were suddenly close, too close, close enough that I could count the small scar above his eyebrow, close enough to feel his breath change rhythm. Neither of us moved. "Ronan," he said, so quiet it was almost not a word at all, just shape and breath. My heart was slamming against my ribs so hard I was sure he could hear it. I could feel the pull between us, invisible and undeniable, like gravity deciding to misbehave. His eyes dropped to my mouth. Mine dropped to his. For one suspended second, the whole world narrowed down to the 3 inches of space between our faces. Then his phone rang, loud and jarring, and the moment shattered like the mug that would break months later. He pulled back, laughing awkwardly, answering some call from his sister, and I sat there with my pulse roaring in my ears, hating and thanking the universe in equal measure. We didn't talk about it. We never talked about the things that mattered most. Not yet. Instead, we let the silence settle over what almost happened, and we both pretended we hadn't felt what we'd felt. I told myself that was fine. I was wrong. That's the thing nobody tells you about falling for your best friend. You don't fall all at once. You fall in installments. A laugh here, a glance there, the particular way he says your name when he's tired, softer, like it's something private just for you. I spent the following months building walls I didn't know I was building. I started dating briefly, disastrously, a guy named Theo from my architecture program, mostly, I think now, to prove to myself that what I felt for Kian was ordinary, containable, nothing more than close friendship confused for something bigger. It didn't work. Theo was kind and smart and utterly forgettable in a way that had nothing to do with him and everything to do with the fact that my mind kept drifting mid-date to what Kian might be doing at that exact moment. Whether he'd already gone up to the rooftop without me. Whether he missed me the way I missed him even when we'd seen each other that same morning. Kian noticed the dating. Of course he did. He never said much about it. But there was a distance that crept into his voice during that time. A politeness that hadn't existed between us before. He'd knock before entering my room instead of just walking in. He stopped falling asleep on the couch beside me. "You've been weird," I said to him one evening, unable to stand the careful, hollow way he was talking to me. "Have I?" He didn't look up from the book he wasn't really reading. "Maybe I just don't want to third wheel your relationship." "There's no relationship to third wheel," I said. "Theo and I broke up last week." That got his attention. He looked up, something unreadable moving behind his eyes. "Oh," he said. "I didn't know. Would it have mattered?" I asked, and I don't know what possessed me to ask it so directly. But the question hung in the air between us, heavy and unfinished. He didn't answer for a long moment. Yeah, he finally admitted, quiet. "It would have." Neither of us pushed further that night. We were both, I think, too afraid of what we'd find if we did. If I thought my own jealousy had been quiet, Kian's arrived with far less subtlety a few months later, when a coworker of his, a friendly, easygoing guy named Dev, started showing up around the house more often. Dev worked with Kian at the bookstore, and he had one of those effortless personalities that made people like him within minutes. He also unmistakably liked Kian. I noticed the way Dev's hand found Kian's shoulder too often. I noticed the way he laughed a little too hard at Kian's jokes, leaned a little too close when they talked. And I noticed, with an unpleasant twist in my stomach that I didn't want to examine too closely, that I hated it. One night, Dev stayed for dinner, and afterward, when he finally left, I found myself unable to keep the edge out of my voice. "He likes you," I said, clearing plates with more force than necessary. Kian raised an eyebrow. "Dev? I mean, we're just friends. He doesn't look at you like just friends." "And how does he look at me?" Kian asked, and there was something challenging in his tone now, something that dared me to say more than I meant to. I opened my mouth, then closed it. "Forget it," I muttered, turning back to the sink. "No," Kian said, and I heard him step closer, felt the warmth of him behind me. "Say it, Ronan." My hands stilled in the soapy water. "He looks at you," I said slowly, the way I stopped myself. The words had almost slipped out, 3 years of careful denial nearly undone by one reckless sentence. The silence that followed was so loud it had a pulse of its own. "The way you what?" Kian asked, barely above a whisper. I turned around. He was closer than I expected, close enough that I had to tilt my head up slightly to meet his eyes, and for a moment, neither of us breathed. His gaze searched mine, desperate and hopeful and terrified all at once, and I understood, with sudden and overwhelming clarity, that he was waiting for me to finish that sentence. that he wanted me to, but I was a coward that night. Nothing, I said, stepping back. It's nothing. I'm tired. Good night, Kian. I left him standing in the kitchen, and I hated myself the entire walk to my room. After that night, something between us cracked, quietly but unmistakably. We still lived in the same house, still passed each other in hallways, still occasionally shared a meal, but the ease that had once defined us, the easy laughter, the comfortable silences, had been replaced by a careful, painful politeness that felt like grief for something we hadn't even lost yet. Kian started spending more time with Dev. I told myself I didn't care. I filled my evenings with study groups and half-hearted attempts at dating apps, swiping through faces that meant nothing to me while the only face I actually wanted stayed frustratingly, achingly out of reach. Weeks passed like this, then a month. The rooftop sat unused, gathering the first hints of spring dust, and I found myself standing outside the laundry room some nights, hand on the loose panel, unable to make myself climb up alone. It was my sister, of all people, who finally said what I'd been too afraid to admit to myself. You talk about him like he's the only person in the world, she said over the phone one night, after I'd spent 20 minutes complaining about how weird Kian had been lately, without once mentioning anything about myself. He's my best friend, I said, defensive. Ronan. Her voice was gentle but firm. I've known you your whole life. I've never heard you talk about a friend the way you talk about him. I didn't have a response for that, because she was right, and some part of me had known it for a very long time. Since the rooftop, since the almost kiss in his bedroom, since every single moment I'd spent memorizing the exact sound of his laugh like it was something I needed to survive. I was in love with my best friend. I had been for a long time, and I had let my fear cost us both months of quiet, unnecessary distance. That night, I decided I couldn't keep pretending anymore. I climbed the ladder to the rooftop for the first time in weeks, half hoping, half dreading that Kian would be there. He was sitting exactly where he always sat, knees drawn up, staring at the same skyline we'd watched 100 times before. He looked up when I climbed through, surprise flickering across his face before he schooled it into something more neutral. Hey, he said carefully. Hey, I said, sitting down beside him, closer than I had in weeks. I missed this. Me too, he admitted quietly. We sat in silence for a while, the kind that used to be comfortable and now felt fragile, like glass that had been cracked and carefully glued but might shatter again with the wrong pressure. Kian, I finally said, my heart hammering so hard I was sure he could hear it. I need to tell you something, and I need you to let me get through it without saying anything, because if I stop, I don't think I'll be brave enough to start again. He turned to look at me fully, something cautious and hopeful warring in his expression. Okay, he said softly. I think my voice cracked. I tried again. I think I've been in love with you for a long time. Maybe since the rooftop that first October. Maybe longer. And I've been so scared of losing you, of losing this whatever we have, that I've let that fear turn me into someone who hurts you instead. I'm sorry for the distance. I'm sorry for Theo, for pretending Dev didn't bother me, for every time I almost said something and didn't. I don't want to pretend anymore, Kian. I needed you to know. The silence after I finished felt like standing at the edge of something enormous. Kian didn't say anything for a long, agonizing moment. Then, slowly, he reached out and took my hand, the first deliberate touch between us in weeks, and laced our fingers together like it was the most natural thing in the world. Do you have any idea, he said, voice rough with emotion, how long I've been waiting for you to say that? What? I breathed, hardly daring to believe what I was hearing. Ronan. He laughed, a little wetly, shaking his head. I've been in love with you since that first night on the rooftop. I almost kissed you in my room in December, and when my phone rang, I could have thrown it off a cliff. I dated no one this whole time because every time I tried, all I could think about was you. I let Dev flirt with me because some pathetic part of me hoped it would make you jealous enough to say something. I've been dying, waiting for you to catch up. You could have told me, I said, half laughing, half crying. So could you, he shot back. But there was no heat in it, only aching fondness. We sat there for a moment, foreheads nearly touching, 3 years of unspoken feeling finally given room to breathe between us. My hand came up to rest against his jaw, and he leaned into the touch like he'd been waiting his whole life for permission. "Can I kiss you?" I whispered. "Ronan," he said, voice breaking on my name, "you'd better." The kiss, when it finally happened, wasn't rushed or desperate the way I might have imagined in all those months of longing. It was slow, careful, the kind of kiss that felt like an answer to a question we'd both been too afraid to ask out loud. His hand came up to cup the back of my neck, mine found the front of his shirt, and for a long, suspended moment, the entire world narrowed down to the two of us on that rooftop, finally where we were always supposed to be. When we broke apart, he rested his forehead against mine, both of us breathing unevenly, both of us smiling like idiots. "So," he said softly, "friendship?" "I take it back," I laughed. "Definitely not just friendship." That mug I mentioned at the beginning, the one that shattered, happened a few nights later in the kitchen, when Kian came up behind me while I was washing dishes and pressed a kiss to the side of my neck, murmuring something about how he'd been wanting to do that all day. I was so startled, so overwhelmed by how easy and natural it suddenly felt to have him close like that the mug slipped clean out of my hand. He laughed so hard he had to lean against the counter, and I found myself laughing too, and it struck me then how strange and wonderful it was that the same fear that had kept us apart for years had transformed, almost overnight, into this easy laughter, easy touch, easy love. We told our friends slowly, carefully, in our own time. Dev, as it turned out, took the news with surprising grace, admitting with a rueful smile that he'd known Kian's heart belonged to someone else long before Kian had figured it out himself. My sister cried on the phone when I told her, though she swore it was allergies. The rooftop became more than ever our place, except now we didn't have to leave 3 inches of careful space between us on the blanket. Some nights we still lie up there watching planes blink across the sky, and Kian will turn to me the way he did that very first October, except now when he says I like this, us, whatever this is, I don't correct him. I just kiss him and say, yeah, me too. Loving someone quietly for years and finally saying it out loud. It doesn't erase the fear completely, but it does prove that some risks are worth every single sleepless night it takes to work up the courage to take them.